Hey everybody, back working on the Mustang. Today we have the steering box set up in the vise down here in the basement workshop, and I'm going to rebuild my steering box. And I thought I would do a how-to video series on this process because there's a lot of work involved, and I found a couple of good videos that helped me get some reference to how I'm going to do it. So I thought I would add to that. So I'll put a link down in the description to the video that I thought was the most helpful for me. It's a French guy. He speaks in English, but it has French subtitles. But he was very good. He's got one video that shows you the whole tear down and rebuild on his steering box. So I'm going to try and duplicate that. Plus, what I've read, in a couple of other places online. So the first thing that I want to do is I got it set up here before we take it apart. Is to just kind of calibrate where it is right now in terms of feel and looseness and adjustment, so that when we put it back together we have a reference point. So right now I have it clinched up in the vise, and I can turn this input shaft, and I'll be quiet. Bottom line is, what happens is, let me get you zoomed in tight and I'll show you what happens with the turning. Okay, now watch the pitman arm, which is this piece up here, when I turn the input shaft, which is the piece, this big long piece that's connected to the steering wheel. What you're trying to do is, every little bit of rotation on the input shaft should equal a turning on the pitman arm. Because if you can turn the steering wheel and the wheels don't move, then you're going to be floating down the road without a lot of control. So watch that dirt on the input shaft. If I turn it I can kind of make it sort of click maybe a 1/16 to an 1/8 of a turn. There's just a little bit of wiggle right here, and the pitman arm is sort of, it almost doesn't respond. But the thing that I notice is I can feel like a clicking in here. And it's like there's one little gear tooth right there. Alright, so now watch how much I turn this and listen. Now that little bit, the pitman arm is moving when I do that. It's moving about the same amount. So I think, that the box is just, it might need some lubrication or something. It's not super bad, but it definitely needs to be at least lubricated. So let me show you another thing that you can do. Alright, so up here at this end, this is where your steering wheel attaches. So when you're in the car, you're driving down the road, you turn the steering wheel, and the service manual tells you that the force required to turn this shaft should be between 9 and 10 inch-pounds measured at this nut on the steering wheel. And I have this little beam type torque wrench that measures inch-pounds, and I got it set up. I can put it on this nut, and if I turn this, it's not the greatest way to measure this value. But if I look at this wrench and I turn it, I spin it around here. Whoops, I gotta. When you reach the full end of the turn, it stops turning. And I don't want to loosen the nut, so I'm gonna put this back on here. As I pull this around and I look at this little torque wrench, this thing is registering maybe 2 or 3, maybe 3 inch-pounds of force. So there's not a lot of preload on the bearings, which is good. And I think that the box might be set up right. So I'm thinking it just might need to be greased or lubricated or something. I don't think it's in super bad shape, so I think it's really a good candidate. We're just going to take it all apart, clean everything. I have a rebuild kit for it. If I decide that some of the parts look bad, I will replace them, but otherwise I think it might just be a matter of it needing to be lubricated and cleaned. So let's tear this thing apart and start to figure out what's going on inside. Alright, so I bought a rebuild kit to do this job. from National Parts Depot. Cost about $100. And this is what's in the kit. You have 2 of these bearings. I think these are the sector shaft bearings, I think. Yeah, I think these are the sector shaft bearings. They're needle bearings in like a cylindrical race. There are 2 of those. These are made in the USA, National Bearing Federal Mogul. You get a gasket for the cover plate to reclose that up. There are 2 more bearings and races for the input shaft, the steering shaft, that big long thing. Let's see. This is some kind of a seal, and it has, this is some kind of a seal, and it has like, it's rubber, and it's got like lips on both sides and a little sort of groove in the middle. I'll just take it out of here and show it to you. So you can see it's not just like an O-ring, it's got a groove in the middle like a pulley or something. And then there's this other Federal Mogul, an oil seal, which goes on the bottom of where the shaft comes out and the pitman arm attaches. Alright, so step 1 is to remove your pitman arm. And what you see here is I have this tool, it's called a pitman arm puller. Don't use a pickle fork, use a pitman arm puller. Mine is already off because I use this tool. But basically all you do is you tighten down on this big screw, and as you do that, you can see it pulls the pitman arm up, and eventually it pops it right off. Okay? Don't use a ball pickle fork, use a pitman arm puller. I got this at Harbor Freight for like $14, and you get the 20% off, so you're paying less than $12. No excuse. Pitman arm puller, easy to get, use it, not a pickle fork. Remove your pitman arm. Clean it up. Next step. The next thing we need to do is loosen the sector shaft, or the input shaft retaining nut, which is this big nut here. And what this does is this big nut holds in this inner thing. See this nut on this piece? This is actually like all this cylinder and this nut are all one big part. It goes down inside there too. So this is a retaining nut that holds this one on, because this one, you tighten this to load the bearings on the input shaft, and then you need to hold it in place. So the way we're going to loosen this is by just putting a screwdriver on this thing and then hitting it with a hammer to tap it around and break it loose. Take that off. Alright, now that that nut is off, we can remove now the input shaft retaining nut, which is this big assembly. And this is not on here super tight. I actually already loosened this, and I had a technical difficulty with the camera. So put it back on just to show you. But this is not, it's not super tight on there. We actually didn't require a lot of effort the first time either to get it off. So just unscrew this. I'm not going to unscrew the whole thing at this moment because I want to take this cover off, and I found that when I take this piece off, this whole input shaft wiggles around a lot, and before I have it jiggling around way too much, I'm going to flip this over and take off this cover plate first. Alright, I got it flipped around in the vise. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to loosen this adjusting nut. Whoa. Just so that we don't have any trouble later trying to take it off. This is the sector shaft adjustment screw, I think is what it's called. And now we're going to take off these 3 cover plate bolts. One thing you should be careful of, there is a shim underneath this screw, the adjusting screw, and I'm going to look for it inside here. So I'm going to be careful when I remove this cover plate. I have to take this nut all the way off because this screw is it's into the end of the sector shaft, you can't just pull it out right now. It's got a little bit of dirt on the ends of these threads. It's making it a little difficult for me to get this nut off. And it would have been helpful too if I would have left one of these screws in this cover plate. But, you know, I'm not going to fight it now. But we'll get it off. Hey, you know, live and learn, that's how these things go. Alright. And the cover plate comes off now. Oh, we have to unscrew the cover plate is screwed to this thing. Let me put the screws back in. Hang on. I just figured out that that's not going to work. Let me just hold it and then I'll turn it with this. Oh man, somebody's got this thing friggin' clamped on there really tight. Turning this clockwise. So it means I turn the cover plate counterclockwise to get it off. And there's a shim underneath the head of this screw, so I'm kind of being careful here to make sure that I don't lose that shim. Wow, that's like all gunked up with... The grease is just really super dry in there. I'm not sure what the grease is supposed to be like. Alright, so there's the cover off. And the gasket, we'll clean all that off later. Put that in the box. Now you can see this. See how this screw, it won't come out? It's inside here on a shaft, and it's supposed to be like very little end play. Like if I push and pull this in and out, I almost don't feel it moving up and down. And that's one of the adjustments we have to make. And there's a shim in there, but we'll get all of that cleaned out. Looks like that grease is just, you know, 52 years old, or however old it is. 50 something years old. Alright, so here's a look down the barrel of this thing. And you can just see all of this old dried up grease in here. It's just like solid, not clay type consistency, but like it's just solid. You know, I don't know how that this grease would really do anything anymore. You can see it's coming out, and it's like coming out clean. Like even it's retaining the shape of the gear in there. You know, here's like the curvature of this sector shaft. So you know this grease is probably not getting redistributed in here. So it's definitely time to get this box cleaned up. Alright, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to loosen the input shaft nut. Make sure this thing's tight in the vise. I'm going to loosen this and take this whole nut off of here. Remember, this is the big one that we loosened up as the second step. Okay, and now the input shaft should come out of here. If I wiggle it around. Let me get this thing repositioned in the vise here a little better. Alright, now this should come out. There it comes. Okay, so that's out. This is the worm gear and the ball nut, and we'll get into that in a second. We just kind of get this all situated so I don't make a complete mess in here.